Mr. President, let me give you another reason why we should oppose this trade agreement. And this is a provision which has gotten far too little attention, and that is the investor-state dispute settlement. That sounds like a highly technical term. What in God's name does that mean? But let me try to explain what it does mean. And what it does mean in English is that it will allow large multinational corporations to sue national, state, and local governments, not just in the United States, but all over the world, if those governments pass legislation that hurts their expected future profits. Let me give you some examples, because we have not talked about this. But let me give you some examples of what is already going on around the world based on similar language to what will be in the TPP if we vote for it. Similar language. Mr. President, and this is maybe the most outrageous example that I can give you, but there are many others. Philip Morris, one of the large tobacco companies in the world, is suing both Australia and Uruguay over labeling requirements for cigarettes. Uruguay is this little country, and what they have done is been very aggressive in trying to protect their children and their people from the very harmful impacts of smoking. Now, you know what? I happen to think that that is a good thing. I think in America and all over the world, we should do everything that we can to make sure that our kids are not hooked on nicotine, do not have to suffer heart disease, cancer, emphysema, and all of the other diseases related to smoking. I think our government should be very vigorous. We have done some things in our country. I think we should do more. Uruguay, a little tiny country, whose president turned out to be an oncologist, guy who was worried about cancer, was very active in trying to do everything he could to keep the kids of Uruguay getting hooked on cigarettes. And what happened to Uruguay? Well, they were taken to this independent tribunal, composing, as I understand it, of 3 corporate lawyers, because Philip Morris said, hey, Uruguay, you're impacting our future profits. We want to get kids hooked onto nicotine. We want to sell our products to kids and to the people of Uruguay, and by fighting us, passing legislation and doing things that will make it harder for kids to smoke, you are ruining our profits. And this case is now resting in an independent tribunal. How insane is that? That a country trying to protect its kids from getting cancer is being sued by Philip Morris because it might cause them profits. So this is not only just a health issue, in this case of cancer prevention. This is an issue of basic democracy. Do the people of Uruguay, do the people of Australia, do the people of any country have a right to be very vigorous in protecting the health of their kids and their citizens without worrying about being sued by a cigarette manufacturer who is trying to poison these kids with deadly products? So this is not only a health issue, it is a basic democratic issue. And if Philip Morris wins this case, it will be sending a message to every government in the world: you can't be aggressive in trying to protect your kids from cigarettes. That's one example. Let me give you another example, equally outrageous. Mr. President, under this investor-state provision, a French waste management firm, Veolia, is suing for $110 million under the France-Egypt bilateral investment treaty over changes to Egypt's labor laws, including an increase in the minimum wage. Now, let me be honest with you, Mr. President. I know nothing about Egypt's minimum wage, but I do think that Egypt and every other country on earth has a right to raise its minimum wage if they think it makes sense, without worrying about being sued by some company who will have to pay higher wages. How crazy is that? So again, not being terribly knowledgeable about domestic policies in Egypt, the idea that they are being sued for the crime of raising their minimum wage is, to me, beyond comprehension. And again, this is just an example of what is happening now and what will only happen in an accelerated manner if we pass this agreement. Let me give you one last example. A Swedish energy company, it's called Vattenfall, launched a $5 billion lawsuit over Germany's decision to phase out nuclear power. This initiative was implemented in response to the Fukushima disaster. So Germany, last I know, was an independent country with an elected government. They made a decision to phase out nuclear energy. Some people think it's a good idea, some people think it's a bad idea, but the last I heard, that should be a decision of the German government and the people who elected that government. The elected officials of Germany are not dummies. I presume they do what their people want them to do, or they pay the political consequence. But that is a decision of the elected officials of Germany. And they said, let's phase out nuclear power. And yet now they are being sued by a Swedish energy company, Vattenfall, for some $5 billion because they made that decision. Now, that's just what's going on right now. Think about what that means into the future. It means that any government around the world or in this trade agreement, it means that any state in the United States, if my state of Vermont, which is sensitive to the environment, decides to go forward on an environmental piece of legislation, why some large corporation can go to an independent tribunal and say, look, we're going to sue Vermont for $1 billion because we wanted to do business there and your environmental regulations are impacting our ability to make profit, and undermine what the state of Vermont or the state of Georgia or any other state chooses to do. That, to me, is just beyond comprehension that anybody would vote for that legislation. We could disagree what they do in Egypt. You could disagree with what they do in Uruguay. We could disagree with what we do here. But to say that an independent tribunal could provide billions of dollars in damage to a corporation because of a democratically made decision in the United States or any other country around the world is, to me, just incomprehensible.